Did you know that nearly 1 in 5 high school campuses in the United States have reported ghost sightings or unexplained paranormal activity, often tied to tragic events in their history? From shadowy figures lurking in abandoned hallways to lights flickering in empty classrooms, these chilling tales serve as a haunting reminder of the secrets some schools may never reveal. Join me as I uncover some of the most spine-tingling high school horror stories ever told, true tales of haunted hallways, ghostly apparitions, and eerie events that defy explanation. These chilling stories are guaranteed to keep you up tonight. It started like any other day at Ridgewood High, a small, unassuming school nestled in the middle of a quiet town. The kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. I used to think that was a good thing. That Friday, the weather was gray and sullen, mirroring my mood. I had a chemistry test during third period that I was completely unprepared for. The halls were their usual chaotic mess. Lockers slamming, laughter bouncing off the walls, and the faint smell of cafeteria food wafting through the air. Then, I noticed something odd. I was walking to my first class when I passed locker number 319. It wasn't my locker, but something about it made me pause. It was open slightly, revealing a stack of neatly folded papers inside. Normally, I wouldn't have cared, but as I glanced at it, I noticed the top sheet had my name written in large, looping letters. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then pulled the paper out. It was a handwritten note. "Don't go to room 104. I frowned. Room 104 was my homeroom. Was this some kind of prank? I looked around, but the halls were emptying quickly. Shrugging it off, I shoved the note into my pocket and went on with my day. When I entered room 104, nothing seemed unusual. Same scratched desks, same fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. My homeroom teacher, Mrs. Callahan, greeted us with her usual tired smile. But as I sat down, something felt off. The air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. I tried to shake the feeling, focusing on the announcements. But then, I noticed the clock. It wasn't ticking. I nudged my friend Sarah, sitting next to me. "Hey, is it just me? Or is the clock broken?" She glanced up and frowned. "It's working fine." I stared at the clock again. The second hand was stuck at 12, unmoving. My unease grew. That's when I noticed the windows. The blinds were partially open, revealing the gray sky outside. But something was wrong. The scene outside didn't look like our school grounds. Instead of the familiar courtyard, there was nothing. Just a blank, endless fog. My heart started to race. I turned to Sarah again, but she was staring straight ahead, unblinking. Everyone was. The entire class sat frozen, their eyes fixed on Mrs. Callahan, who hadn't moved an inch. I stood up. "Mrs. Callahan?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her lips parted slightly, as if she were mid-sentence. Panic bubbled in my chest. I grabbed my backpack and bolted for the door, but the moment I stepped into the hallway, the lights flickered and died. The once busy halls were now eerily silent, illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency lights. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ragged, echoing in the emptiness. That's when I heard it. Faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from down the hall near the gym. Against every ounce of logic screaming at me to leave, I walked toward the sound. My footsteps felt deafening against the tile floor. As I turned the corner, I saw him, a boy about my age standing with his back to me. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his arms hung limply by his sides. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Slowly, he began to turn, and I froze. His face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow black eyes that seemed to pull me in. His mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Why didn't you listen?" he whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. I stumbled back, heart pounding in my chest. I turned and ran, my legs feeling like lead. The tapping grew louder, faster, as if it were chasing me. I don't remember how I made it out of the school. One moment I was sprinting down the endless halls, and the next I was outside, gasping for air. The school looked normal from the outside, bustling with students. But when I turned to look back at the building, I saw him again, standing in the window of room 104, watching me with that same twisted grin. I transferred schools the following week. I never told anyone what happened that day. Not Sarah, not my parents, no one. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tapping. And every time, I think of the note in locker number 319. Don't go to room 104. I never thought my high school would be the setting for the most disturbing experience of my life. It's a story I rarely share, but when I do, I can see the doubt in people's eyes. But I swear, every word of this is true. I attended a small, old high school tucked in the corner of town. The building had stood for over a century, and while most of it had been renovated, there was one wing, the West Wing, that was always off limits. The administration said it was unsafe due to structural issues, but every student knew there was more to it. Whispers about the West Wing were passed down like folklore. Students disappearing, unexplained noises, shadows moving where no one should be. I never paid much attention to those rumors until my senior year. That's when it happened. One rainy October afternoon, I was staying late at school to work on a group project. By the time we wrapped up, it was close to 6 p.m., and the school was eerily quiet. My friend Sarah had left early, and I found myself alone in the main hallway, heading toward the exit. As I passed the corridor leading to the West Wing, I heard it, the faint sound of a bell. It wasn't the loud, cheerful chime of the school bell, but a soft, mournful ring, like an old handbell being swung in slow, deliberate motions. I froze. No one was supposed to be in that part of the school. Yet, the sound was unmistakable, echoing faintly down the darkened corridor. "Hello!" I called out, my voice shaky. No response, just another ring of the bell. Curiosity and stupidity are a dangerous combination. Against my better judgment, I stepped toward the West Wing. The door to the forbidden section was ajar, its rusted hinges groaning as I nudged it open. The air beyond felt colder, damp, like stepping into a basement. The hallway was dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent light, and the smell of mildew and something metallic filled my nose. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but that damn bell kept ringing, pulling me deeper into the corridor. It seemed to come from one of the old classrooms. Room 209, I think it was. The door to 209 was slightly open, and as I approached, I noticed something strange. The handle was scratched, as though someone had been clawing at it. I hesitated, heart pounding, then pushed the door open. The room was empty, or so I thought at first. Desks were scattered haphazardly, and the chalkboard still had faint, ghostly writing on it, too smudged to read. In the corner of the room, near the window, stood an old, tarnished bell on the floor. It swayed slightly, as if someone had just rung it, but no one was there. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. A figure reflected in the cracked window pane. It was a girl, her back turned to me, her long, dark hair tangled and wet as though she'd been standing in the rain. She wore an outdated school uniform, the kind I'd only seen in the old yearbooks in the library. Her head tilted slightly, as if she'd noticed me watching her in the reflection. I spun around, but the room was empty. The reflection, however, remained. I stumbled backward, my breathing erratic, and the girl in the window began to turn, her head swiveling unnaturally far before her body followed. Her face, God, I'll never forget her face, was pale, her eyes dark pits, her mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. And then she screamed. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched wail that seemed to pierce my skull. I bolted out of the room, down the corridor, not daring to look back. The bell rang louder and faster behind me, as though it was chasing me out. When I finally burst into the main hallway, the sound stopped. The air felt normal again, and the West Wing door was shut tight, as if it had never been opened. I reported what happened to the school counselor the next day, but they brushed it off as stress or a prank. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I avoided the West Wing entirely after that. A month later, the school made an announcement. The West Wing was being sealed off permanently. They didn't give a reason, but I heard whispers that a janitor found scratches on the walls inside room 209. Scratches that spelled out a single word: my name. I never thought my last year of high school would haunt me forever. It started in late September, a week after our new math teacher, Mr. Grayson, transferred in. He was quiet, with a strange presence that made people uneasy, though no one could explain why. His hollow, sunken eyes seemed to follow you no matter where you sat in class. One afternoon, while heading to the restroom during his class, I passed the old music room. It had been abandoned for years after funding cuts, and no one ever went near it. As I walked by, I heard faint piano notes. It wasn't a melody, just a series of eerie, disjointed chords. Curious but unnerved, I peered through the dusty glass on the door. The room was empty. Chalking it up to my imagination, I returned to class. But the sounds didn't stop. Over the next week, I heard them every time I passed the room. A few friends joked that the music room was haunted, but something about their laughs felt forced, like they, too, had sensed something was off. One day after school, I decided to investigate. Armed with my phone's flashlight, I approached the door. The closer I got, the heavier the air seemed, like it was pressing down on my chest. When I pushed the door open, the piano stopped. The room was empty, as always, except for the piano in the far corner. Its lid was shut, the keys untouched, but the faint scent of something metallic lingered in the air. As I walked toward the piano, I noticed scratch marks on the walls, dozens of them, some deep enough to splinter the paint. I reached out to lift the piano lid, but before I could, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. Then the piano began to play on its own. The disjointed notes sounded frantic, almost like a warning. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. That's when I saw it. In the dim beam of light, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes just like Mr. Grayson's. It moved unnaturally, jerking closer with each flicker of the light. Its mouth opened, but no words came out. Only a guttural, choking sound that made my stomach turn. I bolted for the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The figure was right behind me now, its icy breath on my neck. In a panic, I screamed, slamming my shoulder into the door until it finally gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. When I looked back, the music room was dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. The next day, I tried to tell my friends, but they brushed it off as a prank or a bad dream. Even I started to doubt myself, until I noticed the scratch marks on my arm. They weren't deep, but they were real, and they hadn't been there before. I avoided the music room after that, but strange things kept happening. Mr. Grayson's behavior grew more unsettling. He'd call out students' names who weren't on the roster, and he seemed to know things about us he shouldn't. One day, he stared at me during class and said, "Some doors should stay closed." That was the last straw. I went to the principal's office to report him, but when I mentioned Mr. Grayson, the secretary gave me a confused look. "Who?" she asked. "Our math teacher," I said, growing frustrated. "There's no Mr. Grayson on staff," she replied. I froze. My hands went clammy as I pulled up the school's website on my phone. His name wasn't listed. Neither was his picture. I never saw him again after that. The next day, a substitute was teaching math, and no one seemed to remember Mr. Grayson at all. It was like he'd been erased. But I remember. I remember the music room, the piano, and that thing that followed me out. Sometimes, I still hear the faint sound of disjointed chords, even when I'm nowhere near the school. And every time I hear them, I wonder if I left the music room, or if it followed me.